the Rechabites, a couple of scrolls, and Baker Street today on another episode of the Bible in 1 year with the preacher's husband. Hey guys, today we're going through Jeremiah chapter 35 through 37, and tomorrow we're going to go through Jeremiah 38 through 40, but we're also going to tag on there Psalm 74 and Psalm 79 for good measure so you can get ahead on your reading. So, we're going to start today by having a little flashback because that's what we're doing. After devoting several chapters to King Zedekiah, Jeremiah is returning back to a decade earlier when Zedekiah's brother Jehoiakim ruled Judah from 609 to 598 BC. So that's the time frame. We didn't go straight through in chronological order because as we read through Jeremiah, there are reasons for that because some of these chapters build on others and then they flash back just like we're doing tonight. So we get to right off the bat in verse 2 here, and the house of the Rechabites is known largely from this chapter. This is the bulk of what we learn about the Rechabites comes from right here in Jeremiah chapter 35. Their founder was Jonadab or Jehonadab, son of Rechab, who lived under King Jehu of the northern kingdom. Now, Jehonadab apparently supported the king's radical reform movements when this was going on back then. Those included demolishing all the Baal cults and all the other elements of Canaanite culture. Now, the Rechabites, they also promised their ancestors that they would not build houses or plant vineyards. So apparently, they would be able to remain mobile. So if they ever had any problems, they had to be attacked, they'd quickly up and go. Whatever happened, they could always up and move. They were very devout worshipers of the Lord. And the Lord told Jeremiah to invite these guys into the temple to offer them a drink of wine. Now, why in the world would he do that? Well, he does, and he offers them a drink of wine. And basically what happens was they replied to Jeremiah. It's like, whoa, brother, we don't drink. You know that. Jonadab, our ancestor, commanded us to say, and he says, you and your descendants must never drink wine. So you must not, and they also said that they must never build a house or sow seed or plant a vineyard. Rather, you must live in tents your whole life. And we obeyed him. We just did what he told us to do. So we haven't had any wine in our whole life. We're not going to drink this wine. So if you look in verse 5, there are these jars, right? And these jars were filled with wine. They were actually large drinking bowls, and they had these little dipping cups that were in them, and that's what you would dip the wine out with to drink it out of. But regardless, the Rechabites were just the specific illustration that Jeremiah needed to teach obedience to the Lord's commands to those of Judah, which is what's happening here. Judah, in verses 12 through 16, is being rebuked. And 3 times in these verses, Jeremiah contrasted the Rechabites' obedience to a human command with Judah's disobedience to our living God. So, what happened to the Rechabites after 587 BC? Nobody really knows except for this one dude, right? Malchijah, the son of Rechab. He repaired the dung gate in the days of Nehemiah. Nehemiah chapter 3, verse 14. And that's about all we know about these guys. So, next, what happens is we get this scroll, right? Jeremiah decides to dictate a scroll. Well, he didn't decide to. God said, Jeremiah, you're going to write this scroll. You're going to dictate it to your scribe. He's going to write it. You're going to tell him my words and let him write it. So he does. He writes this scroll and all the words that God has spoken concerning Israel and Judah and all of those nations. Now, when we get to verse 6, you got to understand here that a number of months have passed between the writing of this scroll and it's public reading that's going to happen. And you'll see that in Jeremiah 36 verse 1, and then you see it again in verse 9 and verse 22. Those are where the dates are posted, and it tells you kind of what happens and when, right? Well, verse 1 here, we're starting out. This is the 4th year of Jehoiakim in 605 to 604 BC. And this was a critical time because at this time Nebuchadnezzar had just defeated the Assyrian forces, and he had begun to move south into Syria and Israel. So this is a very important time. So God instructed him to do this. He does it, and boom, it's done. So this scroll there, he's going to go read this scroll. The scribe is going to go and read this scroll what's coming up next. The 5th year of Jehoiakim, right, was 604 BC in the 9th month. This was when the Babylonians had sacked the Philistine city of Ashkelon. This event may have forced Jehoiakim to switch his allegiance from Egypt to Babylon, because he was actually supporting Egypt at the time. But then once Babylon comes through here, he's like, well, maybe I'm going to support these guys instead. Well, when Micaiah, the son of Gemariah, a family that was supportive of Jeremiah, heard the reading of these scrolls, he repeated the words to all the king's officials. So now all the king's officials know about what's going on. So they're going to go and take this scroll to the king. So they do this, and when they take this scroll to the king, Jehoiakim burns it. Thus all the flames that we have here. He burns this scroll. So he tries to get Jeremiah and go have him arrested, but they get away at this point. Then he's got to create a replacement scroll. God tells him, he says, look, this scroll is burnt, so you're going to have to make another one, brother. Just repeat all those words that I have told you before, put those on the scroll, and put these extra words on there too. So Jeremiah does it. Now, in creating this replacement scroll, Jeremiah dictated to his scribe, Baruch, the words that had been on the first scroll, plus the others that God had told him. And then presumably these new words dealt with the fulfillment of his prophecies about Judah as events unfolded after the burning of the first scroll. Now, 18 years passed between the end of chapter 36 to the beginning of chapter 37. What happened to that scroll? I don't know. I tried to do a little bit of research on this scroll, and I couldn't find really much on it as far as has anybody ever found it. I don't know. Haven't got that far along in the story yet. So what happened to the scroll? Anybody know? I don't know. So next is Jerusalem's last days. Now, for the second time, again, we are 18 years in advance, right? This is the second time that Zedekiah sent messengers to Jeremiah asking for an intercessory prayer. And of course, Jeremiah does not tell the king what he wanted to hear. So Jeremiah was arrested, and he was sent out to inspect, as he was going out to inspect and claim his portion of the property in his native town of Anathoth. So anyway, he had just purchased this property from his cousin Hanamel. Remember when we went through that chapter where he had purchased this from prison? Well, this is the time frame that we're talking about here. An officer of the guard presumed Jeremiah was defecting to the enemy when he saw him trying to get away, go to claim his property. And after all, the prophet had encouraged others to surrender to the Babylons by this time. But Jeremiah denied the charges. Either way, he was placed in a cell in the dungeon at this point. And this was a vault that was an underground dungeon of sorts where he could have been left to die. There's actually real pictures. It's just a artist depiction of what it might be, but this is not really what it looked like. It was more squared off. The hole going down was more squared off, and there was a little ladder to get the guy down there, and then they pull the ladder up, and he would just stay down in this hole, essentially. He could have been left there to die, but he wasn't. King Zedekiah called for Jeremiah a third time, but in this third time, he called for him in secrecy. He called him aside, just basically pulled him aside. Hey, Jeremiah, come here. Let's have a little private talk. So he did that, and perhaps he was doing this to maybe encourage a good word from the Lord from Jeremiah, but the word from Jeremiah was not good again. the king of Judah, would be handed over to the king of Babylon. Now Zedekiah reversed his officials' decisions and transferred Jeremiah to the guard's courtyard at that time, where he was given a loaf of bread each day from the baker's street. Now, the Baker Street, is it that Baker Street? No, not really that Baker Street. Sorry about the slides there. It's actually streets in Near Eastern cities at that time were named after those whose businesses were on that street, hence Baker Street. And this is the only street name in ancient Jerusalem known to us because the Bible refers to Baker Street. Well, that's what I got for you today. I hope this has touched you. If it has, click the like button, subscribe button, the follow button, the little punching bag to rumble with me on Rumble. And I hope to see you again tomorrow for another episode of the Bible in 1 Year with the Preacher's Husband. We'll see you then.